Imagine a seed ship has crossed interstellar space carrying frozen human embryos instead of an adult crew. After reaching its destination, automated systems begin the first pregnancy, and months later a child is born on a world where no human adult has ever lived. That is where the apparent simplicity of the idea begins to disappear. During the voyage, carrying embryos avoids many of the problems of transporting living people for decades or centuries. There are no crews to feed, no families growing old aboard the spacecraft, and far less living space has to remain habitable throughout the crossing. But once the first child is born, all of the work normally done by adults still has to happen. A newborn has to be kept warm, fed safely and watched closely enough for illness or injury to be recognized quickly. As the child grows, those needs become more complicated. Someone has to teach language, movement, and everyday behavior, respond to fear and distress, and eventually help that child understand how to live with other people. On a seed ship, every one of those roles would have to be performed by machines. Keeping a child physically alive would therefore be only the first test. Human development depends on years of interaction, learning, and care, and the first generation would have no parents, teachers, or experienced community around them except whatever the spacecraft was designed to provide. The difficulty becomes even greater because those children would eventually have to take over. They would need to grow into adults capable of caring for the next generation, maintaining the settlement, and building relationships with one another, all without having grown up inside an existing human society themselves. If the machines fail to provide something important during those early years, there may be no adult crew nearby who can recognize the mistake and compensate for it. So delivering viable embryos to another world would not yet create a human colony. The mission would have to turn stored embryos into healthy pregnancies, newborns into functioning adults, and eventually those adults into a community able to continue without the machines that raised them. That is the real challenge behind the seed ship idea. Removing adults from the voyage may make the spacecraft much easier to send between stars, but it does not remove the enormous amount of care, knowledge, and human development that normally passes from one generation to the next. By the end of this video, you will understand why transporting frozen embryos may be one of the easier parts of such a mission, what machines would have to do after the first birth, and whether a generation raised without parents could realistically become the beginning of a self-sustaining human society. If you enjoy exploring questions like this with me, subscribing helps others find them too. Liking and sharing the video helps even more. Now, let's begin. A seed ship can sound cold until you look at the problem it is trying to solve. Sending awake adults to another star means sending everything their living bodies need for the entire crossing. They need rooms, food, water, air, medical care, exercise, and protection from radiation. Every person adds more mass, and that extra mass demands still more fuel and machinery. Embryos seem to cut through much of that burden. They are not tiny passengers waiting in miniature cabins. They are stored developmental potential, held until the ship reaches a place where human lives can begin. Instead of carrying a large crew through decades or centuries, the spacecraft carries the biological starting point for that crew. The appeal is immediate. A ship without awake travelers needs no living quarters for them during the voyage. It does not have to feed hundreds of people, manage their waste, or maintain a comfortable human environment across all those years. Its payload can become smaller, and a smaller payload changes the whole design. Less mass means less energy needed to accelerate, slow down, and protect the craft. That opens possibilities that a crewed ship might never have. Engineers could devote more of the launch mass to shielding, repair systems, scientific tools, and the equipment needed at the destination. The ship might travel faster because it is not pushing a complete human habitat through space. It could also endure failures that would be fatal to a sleeping or awake crew, then repair itself without anyone waiting for air. There is something deeply attractive about this idea. Humanity would no longer need to move a working town between stars. We would send the capacity to build one after arrival. The people themselves would begin life where they were meant to live. without spending their childhood inside a vehicle crossing empty space. For mission planners, that looks almost like permission to think bigger. A destination once too distant for living travelers may become reachable by machines carrying frozen beginnings. The nursery waits at the far end, while the ship crossing the darkness can remain mostly a machine. Yet the mass has not vanished, it has changed form. Those embryos cannot become children by themselves, and the missing adults must be replaced by something capable of building bodies, raising minds, and creating a human community from its first breath. The shortcut works only if the ship can carry a civilization's first caregivers without carrying any caregivers at all. A child arriving on that distant world would need far more than food, warmth, and a safe room. Before the first birth, machines would have to thaw selected embryos, confirm that development had begun, and manage pregnancy from its earliest days through delivery. Then the work would change. A newborn needs feeding, cleaning, sleep, touch, protection, and someone able to notice when a slight change means illness. On Earth, those jobs are spread across parents, nurses, doctors, relatives, and whole institutions. A light spacecraft cannot carry any of them, so automation must stand in for all of them at once. It must recognize distress in a baby who cannot explain what hurts, respond to an emergency no mission planner predicted, and keep doing so through years of wear with no experienced adult nearby. Survival is only the first layer. Children learn through constant contact with people who already understand their world. Someone names the cup, corrects a dangerous mistake, settles an argument, and explains why one rule applies now while another will apply tomorrow. If you remove every adult, a machine has to carry all of that teaching. It must pass on language and practical skills while giving each child enough personal attention to become a capable person rather than merely a healthy body. And the lessons cannot stop with reading, farming, or repairing equipment. These children would inherit a settlement whose rules were written before they were born, by people they could never meet. They would need ways to change those rules and divide the work. They would also have to settle disputes, care for anyone who could not contribute, and decide who has authority when the automated system gives an answer they believe is wrong. That creates an awkward problem. The machines begin as caregivers and teachers, yet they also control the nursery, food, medical equipment, and much of what the children know about Earth. For years, perhaps decades, the system keeping them alive may also hold the greatest power in their lives. We would be asking it to raise people who could eventually question its decisions and take that power away. The lighter payload is possible only through a larger substitution. Artificial gestation replaces pregnancy. Robotic care replaces the adults around a newborn. Education carries language, knowledge, and culture, while a legal system waits for people who had no part in creating it. Removing the adults does not remove their work. It gathers that work inside the ship, then asks machines to hand it back, piece by piece, to the first generation. That first generation would inherit more than a ship. It would inherit every choice made before launch, including choices its members could never revisit. Each kilogram left on Earth makes departure easier, yet something aboard must later provide the missing tool, skill, spare part, or human judgment. The mass saved at the beginning becomes work owed at the other end. That makes an embryo ship less like a stripped-down settlement and more like a long chain of deferred obligations. A human crew can notice a failing pump, improvise a repair, teach an apprentice, and change a plan when reality refuses to cooperate. Embryos can do none of that during the voyage. The ship must carry those abilities in another form and preserve them until people exist who can take over. Some of the debt sits in hardware. Robotic systems need parts and maintenance, along with ways to recover from faults without a nearby mechanic. Another part sits in information. The ship needs medical guidance, engineering knowledge, farming methods, languages, and records explaining why certain rules exist. Yet some of the debt cannot be packed into a manual. We develop judgment through practice, mistakes, trust, and contact with other people. A database may contain the right answer without recognizing when that answer no longer fits. Time adds interest to this debt. Equipment ages before its intended users are born. Instructions can become detached from the conditions that once made them sensible. A caretaker system designed on Earth may face a problem its makers never expected. Then pass the result to children who cannot ask those makers what they meant. Saving payload at launch does not erase complexity. It postpones that complexity and places it in a future where help is much farther away. The people born aboard would eventually receive this inheritance without having agreed to its terms. Their survival would depend on systems chosen centuries earlier, and their first chance to change those systems might come only after those systems had shaped them. Even a successful design would arrive carrying old assumptions about family, authority, health, education, and the kind of society the destination was meant to become. The launch mass, then, is only the first entry in the account. Every removed adult, workshop, hospital, and living tradition leaves an obligation that must remain intact across the voyage. Before any machine can begin paying those debts, though, the mission has to preserve its smallest and most irreplaceable cargo. Can human embryos actually survive storage for that long? The strongest evidence does not come from a spacecraft or a laboratory simulation. It comes from fertility clinics, where embryos have been frozen, stored, thawed, transferred, and followed through birth. Those births give us something far better than a claim that the cells still looked healthy under a microscope. They show that some stored embryos can resume development and lead to living children. The most striking cases have crossed roughly 2 decades between freezing and birth. In individual reports, embryos kept in liquid nitrogen for around 20 years were later thawed and used in pregnancies that ended in live births. That is not a theory about possible survival. It happened in clinical care, with all the awkward paperwork and waiting that real families know well. Case reports, however, can only show that survival is possible. They cannot tell us how often it works across thousands of patients. For that, researchers have turned to large modern groups of cases. They compare outcomes after different storage times, but only within the periods clinics can observe. These studies include many thousands of transfers, which makes them much more informative than one remarkable birth. They offer a population-level view, though still over years or decades, not centuries. The results are reassuring in a limited way. Storage itself, once an embryo is held at the extremely low temperature of liquid nitrogen, is not like slow aging in a freezer at home. Chemical activity is reduced so sharply that the passage of another month does not mean another month of normal biological wear. Most of the immediate danger lies in freezing, thawing, handling, and whether the embryo was healthy before storage. Even so, clinic records do not give a perfectly clean answer about time alone. Older samples may have been frozen with earlier methods. Newer ones may benefit from vitrification, a faster process that limits damaging ice crystals. Patients, embryo quality, transfer practice, and record keeping also differ. A lower success rate after longer storage, when a study finds one, may therefore reflect more than storage duration. This leaves us with a firm but narrow foothold. Human embryos have survived clinical storage for about 20 years and have produced live births after thawing. Large cohorts add confidence that cryostorage is a working medical practice across the time windows we have actually measured. They do not turn 20 years into 200, and they cannot certify a mission whose storage system must run beyond any clinic's experience. So the first step is real. This is not cargo that has only survived on paper. There are children alive because an embryo remained frozen through much of another person's adult life. That is enough to support careful engineering, and nowhere near enough to promised centuries. We have a foothold, not a guarantee, and the difference cannot be ignored. The reassuring evidence becomes less reassuring when we ask what clock it was tested against. A clinic can show that frozen embryos remained viable across about 2 decades, while a ship may need its stored population to wait for centuries. Those statements sound related because both concern time in storage, yet the longer claim is not simply the shorter one with extra zeros. Consider what a 20-year record actually contains. It covers freezers that people built and watched within living memory. Those same people could service or replace them. Staff can notice a failing alarm, move samples, change procedures, and learn from other clinics using similar equipment. Even when the embryo stays untouched, the system around it benefits from a society that still makes spare parts and trains specialists. That background support is easy to overlook because it sits outside the storage tank. An 11-year cohort window gives another kind of evidence. Researchers can compare many stored embryos, follow outcomes, and look for patterns that a single case might hide. This helps answer whether the method works across a measured group under present-day clinical conditions. It does not tell us what happens after year 80, year 200, or after several generations of machinery have come and gone. Time creates more than a longer waiting period. Seals can leak, sensors can drift, and coolant can escape. Software and records can fail as well. While each repair creates another chance for a small error, a clinic meets those risks inside a network of hospitals, manufacturers, regulators, and power systems. A distant ship would have to carry that network with it, preserve the skills, and keep the whole chain working without replacement from Earth. There is also a statistical trap in the phrase longest successful storage. A record tells us that one sample crossed a line and survived. It cannot show that every sample would have the same chance, or that survival stays level as decades accumulate. To learn that, we would need evidence extending through the period we plan to trust, gathered under conditions close to those aboard the ship. We do not have that evidence. This leaves the engineering case in a precise place. Measured storage supports the first 20 years far better than it supports the next 200. Confidence must therefore come from more than the embryo record itself. It would depend on cooling and monitoring systems with backups, hardware that can be repaired, and protected records. The crew would also need a way to test samples without consuming the population the mission needs. Each layer can reduce risk, but none can turn an observed decade into an observed century. The evidence says long-term freezing can work. It does not say how long this particular system will keep working, so the claim must stay narrow. Clinical success gives us a starting point, while confidence across a full mission remains a prediction that no storage record has tested. A mission lasting centuries cannot treat one successful storage record as proof that every embryo will remain viable until it is needed. The record ends while the voyage continues, and beyond that point, each year adds another chance for something to drift, wear out, or escape notice. That changes how the mission has to be planned. Engineers cannot take the longest proven result, extend the line across 200 years, and call the problem solved. They need room for the prediction to be wrong, because the far end of the timeline has never been observed. Some risks would build slowly. A sensor might become less accurate, while a backup ages beside the system it was meant to replace. Small temperature changes might pass unnoticed if the instruments themselves have shifted. Even careful maintenance would be performed by people using equipment designed generations before they were born. No single problem has to destroy the mission for uncertainty to grow. Several small problems can narrow the choices left for everyone later. You can see why margin has to be physical, not symbolic. A reassuring test on Earth cannot stand in for spare capacity aboard the ship. The mission would need more stored embryos than its population plan expects to use. It would also need separate ways to keep them stable and enough test material to check the system over time. It would also need rules for when a troubling result should trigger repair, a schedule change, or the use of another reserve. Those reserves cannot be calculated from confidence alone. If the mission carries only the number required by its population model, every loss reduces the population it can create. Carrying more offers protection, yet the ship becomes heavier, the storage system grows, and the maintenance burden rises. Margin protects the future, but we still have to launch it with the mission. That is the planning consequence of bounded evidence. A demonstrated success can justify beginning the design. It cannot justify removing every spare, shortening every test, or assuming that the final decade will resemble the first. As the unobserved years accumulate, the mission depends more heavily on choices made before anyone aboard can know whether they were enough. And when those embryos are finally needed, storage is no longer the only uncertainty. Who will raise the first children, and what kind of human world will be waiting for them? Clinical success can make embryo storage look like a solved problem. A sample is frozen, kept for several years, thawed, and later leads to a healthy birth. That result is real, and it gives doctors a strong reason to trust the method within the timescales they have observed. Yet a generation ship would ask the same cells to remain usable across stretches of time that no clinic can test in advance. The evidence begins on solid ground, then thins as the years continue, because fewer stored embryos have been followed for the longest periods, and fewer transfers can be compared. Some long-term studies have found lower implantation rates or fewer live births when embryos had remained frozen for more than about 5 years. Other studies have not found the same decline, and successful births have followed much longer storage. Those findings do not cancel one another. They may reflect differences in patients, freezing methods, or laboratory practice. Embryo quality also varies, and very few cases reach the far end of the timeline. The problem is that the record cannot yet tell us whether time itself causes a gradual loss, or whether the pattern comes from who was treated and how. 5 years is not a cliff. There is no agreed point at which a well-stored embryo suddenly changes from viable to unusable. The studies give us a spread of outcomes shaped by changing technology and incomplete follow-up, not a timer that can be printed on a mission plan for a clinic that may be enough to discuss chances with one patient. For a ship carrying humanity's future, it is a very different kind of evidence. A modest change in success, repeated across many attempts, could consume reserves faster than expected and leave the crew with fewer paths around a failure. This is where confidence has to separate into 2 layers. We can be confident that modern cryostorage works under controlled conditions for years. We cannot assign the same confidence to a century, much less several centuries, simply by extending the line on a graph. Materials age, records drift, procedures change, and every transfer depends on people and equipment performing correctly at the far end. Even if the cells remain stable, the evidence around them becomes less direct with every untested decade. A mission designer, therefore, has a probability range, not a shelf life, and that range grows wider with time. The practical response is not to declare the method unsafe. It is to admit that the longest part of the voyage sits beyond the strongest data, then build around that fact. More stored material may help, but only if preservation systems, monitoring, repair plans, and transfer procedures can survive with it. Independent backups may reduce one failure while adding more machines that can fail in other ways. The uncertainty has moved outward. It no longer belongs only to the embryo in its container. It belongs to the whole chain that must protect it across a human lifetime and far beyond. A cryobank on Earth sits beneath miles of atmosphere, protected by a magnetic field and surrounded by technicians who can replace a failing part within hours. A bank crossing deep space loses those protections. Its reproductive cells may stay cold, yet the voyage can still change what reaches the destination. Outside Earth's magnetic shelter, high-energy particles pass through the ship and sometimes through the shielding around its cargo. They can break DNA, damage cell machinery, or leave changes that are hard to detect before use. Cold slows chemistry, but it does not make genetic material invisible to radiation arriving from space. Shielding can reduce the dose, although it cannot simply erase it. More mass helps against some particles, while collisions inside the shield can produce secondary radiation. Water, food, fuel, and waste might be arranged around a protected vault, turning supplies the ship already carries into part of its defense. That sounds reassuring, until you remember that protection changes during the trip. Tanks empty, stores move, equipment is repaired, and the ship may rotate or maneuver. A vault safe under one loading pattern may receive a different dose under another. Reproductive design, therefore, has to track exposure, rather than only claim that shielding is enough. There is also gravity, or the ship's attempt to replace it. Human cells evolved under Earth's steady pull. In orbit, researchers have seen altered cell growth, gene activity, and tissue behavior, although those findings do not give a clean forecast for frozen embryos on a century-long flight. The evidence gap becomes wider after thawing, Fertilization and the first cell divisions depend on precise timing. So do implantation and the formation of the first tissues, where chemical signals and physical forces must work together. Altered gravity may affect some of those steps, but current studies are too limited to assign a dependable mission risk. Radiation and gravity may also interact. A dose measured in stored material is different from exposure during early development. At that stage, cells divide quickly, so a small error can spread into many later cells. Testing either hazard alone may miss the conditions a crew actually faces. This is where Earth clinic records stop carrying the full argument. They can show that carefully frozen material sometimes remains viable for decades under terrestrial care. They cannot show that the same material will tolerate accumulated cosmic radiation, changing shield geometry, altered gravity, and a distant thaw. A credible mission would need a radiation meter beside each store, with matching control samples. Repeated genetic checks would preserve scarce material, with clear limits for retiring a batch. Several protected locations would also be needed, because one vault can preserve every sample and still preserve one shared mistake. So the reproductive system is not cargo waiting for arrival. It is an experiment running throughout the voyage, with evidence gathered as conditions change. Even perfect refrigeration would answer only the storage question. The harder problem is whether the cells and earliest stages of development remain usable at all after years beyond Earth's shelter. A ship may carry enough frozen beginnings and still arrive without knowing which survived intact. Calling this storage makes it sound passive, as though the embryos could be placed in a cold box and forgotten until someone opens it centuries later. On a generation ship, storage would be an active system that has to keep working every hour of the voyage. The freezer is only one part of it. Power, cooling, shielding, monitoring, spare equipment, and trained people all become part of the same promise. That promise is harder to make than it first appears. The longest records from Earth leave room for doubt about what happens far beyond the periods we have actually tested. The trip would also place the embryos in an environment those records do not cover. A sample can remain frozen and still face damage from radiation, mechanical stress, or a slow change in conditions that no alarm was designed to notice. Time joins all those risks together. A brief failure may be survivable if another cooling system takes over at once. A longer interruption may allow temperatures to rise through a range that changes the cells, even if they later freeze again. The container could look untouched. Its display could return to normal. Yet, the biological history inside it would no longer be the one the mission planned. So cryogenic continuity means more than keeping a chamber cold. It means producing power without a long break and moving heat away. Pumps and sensors must be replaceable and checked for accuracy, with enough coolant and spare parts left for people born long after launch. It also means knowing when an embryo has crossed a limit that cannot be seen from the outside. Shielding belongs inside that same system. So do maintenance, records, and decisions about which stores remain trusted. If any link fails, intact arrival becomes a weak description. The embryos may still be physically present, but presence alone says very little about whether they can do what the mission requires. This is why no single freezer test can settle the problem. Strong results under one set of conditions cannot prove performance across centuries. They do not cover deep space radiation, repeated repairs, power transfers, and generations of human oversight at the same time. Each claim depends on the others holding at the same time. Long survival without protection is not enough. Protection without continuous cooling is not enough. Continuous cooling without evidence of biological function is not enough either. The ship would therefore arrive with a history, not just a collection. The embryos would carry a record of every temperature change and radiation exposure, along with each repair, warning, and uncertain reading. Only then could the crew judge what had truly survived. And even if that entire chain held, one much more intimate problem would remain. Could an embryo preserved across the voyage begin a healthy pregnancy in a human body far from Earth? The experiment most people have in mind did not begin with an embryo. It began with premature lambs that had already spent most of their development inside their mothers. Their organs were formed, their hearts were beating, and blood was already flowing through their umbilical cords. The researchers were trying to preserve that existing connection after an early delivery, not recreate pregnancy from its first days. In 2017, a team at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia described a system often called the biobag. A lamb was delivered by caesarean section and placed inside a clear, sealed bag filled with warm, artificial amniotic fluid. Its umbilical cord was connected to a low-resistance oxygenator, which allowed the lamb's own heart to move blood through the circuit. There was no mechanical pump forcing blood around. That helped protect a circulation system still built for life before birth. Several lambs remained in the system for about 4 weeks. During that time they grew wool, opened their eyes, moved, swallowed fluid, and showed continued development of the lungs and other organs. Later studies and new designs added more evidence. This support may help a very premature fetus keep developing under conditions closer to the womb than an incubator can provide. It was a striking result, and the word womb made it easy for headlines to stretch what had happened. Yet the device replaced only a late part of pregnancy. It did not support fertilization, guide an early embryo through implantation, build a placenta, or manage the long sequence in which cells become tissues and organs. The lamb entered the bag with much of that work already done by a living ewe. This difference is especially important for a ship carrying embryos. Extreme prematurity rescue begins with a fetus whose body and placenta have already developed together for months. An embryo begins with only a small group of cells and no working lungs, umbilical circulation or mature organs to support. The biobag can take over some jobs near the end of gestation because those structures already exist. It cannot simply be moved backward to the beginning. Researchers working on artificial placenta systems are careful about this boundary. Their near-term aim is usually to improve survival and health for babies born far too early, while avoiding the lung damage that ventilation can cause. Even that remains experimental and would require demanding safety evidence before use in people. So the lambs showed that part of gestation might continue outside the body. They did not show that a complete pregnancy could happen there. Between a thawed embryo and a fetus ready for that kind of support lies almost the entire span we still cannot replace. The lamb fetuses in the 2017 experiment were already well along in development. When researchers placed them into the fluid-filled support bags, the lambs were about as developed as human infants born at roughly 22 to 24 weeks of pregnancy. That comparison isn't exact because sheep and humans grow at different rates. Still, it shows where the experiment began. A human pregnancy usually lasts about 40 weeks. By week 22, the embryo has long since become a fetus. The basic body plan is in place. The heart has been beating for months, limbs have formed, and the placenta has already spent a long time managing the exchange of oxygen, nutrients, and waste with the mother. Much of the earliest and most delicate construction is over before an artificial placenta could take control. This makes the timing easier to see. Starting at conception would mean supporting every stage from a single fertilized cell onward. Starting near 22 weeks means receiving a tiny body that has already passed through more than half of a typical pregnancy. The system may extend development from there, but it hasn't created the organs, blood vessels, or fetal circulation it depends on. Even the word halfway can mislead us. Development doesn't proceed like a machine being assembled at a steady rate, one equal piece each week. Early pregnancy includes major changes that happen quickly and in a strict order. Cells divide, specialize, move into position, and begin forming organs. Temporary structures appear, do their work, and change again. A mistake during one short window can affect everything that follows. By the time a fetus reaches the stage represented by those lambs, it carries the results of all that earlier work. Researchers can try to preserve the conditions its body now expects, especially the fluid around it and the flow of blood through the umbilical cord. They aren't beginning with raw biological material and directing it through the first months of development. For a human comparison, this is less like growing a baby outside the body from the start, and more like taking over care after pregnancy has already done most of the building. That could still become a major medical advance. A few extra weeks of protected development might spare a very premature infant from severe lung injury and other complications of being born too soon. Yet the missing part remains immense. To support a full pregnancy outside the body, a system would have to cross the long stretch before 22 weeks. That includes implantation, formation of the placenta, and the earliest stages of organ development. The lamb experiment began on the far side of those events. The front half of the problem was still inside the mother. There is another limit inside the lamb results: time. The animals did not remain in the fluid system for an entire pregnancy. In the best known experiments at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, they were supported for up to 4 weeks. During that period, they continued to grow, open their eyes, develop wool, and move much as they would have inside a ewe. It showed that this narrow stretch of development could continue outside the womb, but only for the span the experiment actually tested. 4 weeks, though, is still 4 weeks. It is not conception to birth, and it does not show that the same device could carry an embryo through every stage of pregnancy. The experiment tested a defined medical handoff. A fetal lamb was delivered by surgery and connected to the system through its umbilical vessels. It stayed in a fluid-filled bag while an outside machine performed the exchange normally handled by the placenta. That distinction can disappear when the device is called an artificial womb. The name sounds complete, as if the machine replaces pregnancy itself. What it replaced was one part of the womb's work during one late period for a limited number of weeks. Even then, the researchers were not trying to carry development all the way to natural birth. They were testing whether fragile lungs and a working fetal circulation could be protected long enough to improve the chances of survival. The duration boundary also tells us what the evidence cannot answer. We do not know whether support could continue safely for 2 months, 3 months, or longer. A system that works for several weeks may face new problems during a longer stay. Infection or damage to the umbilical vessels may appear, while nutritional needs change. Mechanical faults and subtle effects on the brain or other organs may take longer to detect. Some risks may be manageable. Others may appear only after longer experiments and years of follow-up. Success at 4 weeks does not let us assume success at 8. The strongest claim is also the narrowest one. Researchers have shown that late fetal development can continue for a bounded period in an artificial fluid environment under close control in lambs. They have not shown uninterrupted development from conception, and they have not shown a complete artificial pregnancy in humans. The evidence supports a bridge for extreme prematurity, not a cradle-to-birth machine. That bridge could still save lives. It could give a very premature infant more time to develop without forcing immature lungs to breathe air too soon. Yet every added week would ask the system to manage changes it has not yet faced. If a few weeks already require such close control, what would have to change before development could safely continue much farther? A successful delivery would feel like the end of the problem. After months of keeping a developing body alive inside a machine, birth would seem to prove that the system had worked. It would prove something narrower. The artificial womb had supported development until delivery. That would be a major result, but the evidence would still stop at the edge of a new environment. The lungs must exchange gases, the gut must process food, body temperature must stay stable, and infection becomes a different kind of threat. During pregnancy, many of those jobs are handled through the placenta. Oxygen arrives without breathing, nutrients arrive without feeding, and waste leaves through another body. Delivery removes that shared support within minutes, leaving the newborn to take over several tasks almost at once. We already know how demanding that handover can be. A premature baby may need help breathing, food through a tube, careful control of warmth, and constant checks for infection. Even if an artificial womb carried development farther, no one could assume the transition would be smooth. The machine might keep the fetus alive while failing to prepare every organ for life outside it. Delivery would therefore be more than a date on a mission schedule. It would test whether development had produced a newborn able to survive the change. Some problems might appear at once. Others could emerge over days, months, or years, affecting the immune system, the brain, the lungs, or the way the body handles food. This is where the limits of the evidence become especially important. A bounded support run can show whether circulation stayed stable and whether organs continued to mature during that period. It cannot show that every later transition will work, or that development followed the same path it would have followed inside a body. Even a healthy-looking birth would answer only the first set of questions. The child would still need air, food, warmth, protection from infection, close observation, and people ready to respond when a system designed on Earth met a problem far from Earth. Delivery would not confirm that the whole chain was complete. It would mark the point where one carefully controlled dependence ended and another began. The mission would have brought a child across the first threshold, but whether the child could live beyond it would still have to be learned. A newborn habitat would have to work more like a small intensive care unit than a nursery, giving the child stable warmth, filtered air, clean surfaces, and controlled light. Sensors would have to detect trouble before a person could see it and keep each fragile system within safe limits. One of the first pressures would be infection. Newborn immune defenses are still developing, while life inside a sealed habitat brings people, food, water, waste, tools, and recycled air into close contact. The care space would need barriers against microbes, reliable sterilization, and ways to handle the child without turning every feeding or examination into a new path for contamination. Yet complete isolation would bring problems of its own. Caregivers would still need access, and the child would still need safe contact with them. Nutrition would require the same close control. Milk or another carefully designed food source would have to provide the right balance as the child grew. Not simply enough calories to prevent hunger. The habitat would need to prepare it safely, store it without spoilage, measure how much the child received, and track whether the body was absorbing it. A small error repeated across weeks could affect growth before you saw any visible change. Sensing would become part of the room itself. Breathing rate, blood oxygen, temperature, heart activity, weight, hydration, and signs of infection would need steady observation. Some sensors could touch the skin, while others might watch from nearby. Collecting all that data would be easier than deciding which change required action, especially when the medical record came from children raised on Earth. We wouldn't know at first whether every familiar threshold still applied. And action would sometimes be necessary. The crew would need medicines in usable condition, equipment sized for a newborn, sterile fluids, respiratory support, and people trained to perform delicate procedures. Machines would have to remain repairable, while drugs and test materials would need replacement or local production. A neonatal unit on Earth can call another specialist, order a missing part, or transfer a child to a larger hospital. A distant habitat cannot. Survival after birth would depend on a continuous chain of clean air, safe food, accurate sensing, working equipment, trained judgment, and timely care. The pressure would narrow to one hard limit, whether that chain could keep running when even a small failure had nowhere else to go. Suppose that chain holds. A baby is delivered safely, begins breathing, stays warm, takes in enough milk, and makes it through the first dangerous weeks. The medical system has done something remarkable. It has kept a newborn body alive far from Earth. Yet survival is only the first layer of the problem. A child isn't a patient who can be discharged once breathing, pulse, and temperature look good. The brain keeps building itself through contact with other people, especially during the first years of life. Touch, familiar voices, shared attention, comfort after distress, and the slow exchange of sounds all help shape how a child learns to regulate fear, form attachments, and understand language. Much of that growth happens through thousands of small responses. When a baby cries, someone comes. When the baby looks toward a face, the face responds. A sound is repeated and then answered. None of this looks like advanced technology. It can happen while someone feeds a child, changes a blanket, or walks the same corridor for the 100th time. Still, those repeated exchanges are part of the child's developing environment, as real as air pressure or nutrition. That makes the mission's human workload much larger than a medical schedule might suggest. Newborn care cannot end when breathing becomes steady. Infants need dependable caregivers who recognize them and learn their signals. Those caregivers must remain available through exhaustion, illness, and the demands of keeping the habitat running. Later, the children need conversation and play, along with boundaries, teaching, and other children. Enough people must be present for relationships to grow beyond one exhausted caretaker. Machines may support some of this. They could watch sleep, notice changes in movement, offer lessons, or help caregivers track development. What we do not know is how much human presence such systems could safely replace, especially for children growing up without parents who chose and prepared for that role. A machine may detect a cry with perfect accuracy. Recognizing why this child is crying and becoming someone the child trusts is another kind of work. So a nursery might keep every infant fed, warm, and medically stable, yet still fall short of raising healthy people, who would provide the lasting care and attachment those children need. Feeding a child, keeping them clean, and treating illness are all necessary. They're also only part of caregiving. A child develops through repeated contact with someone who notices their signals, responds in a fitting way, and returns often enough to become familiar. That process is called attachment. The name can sound abstract, but you can recognize the behavior easily. A baby cries and a caregiver comes. The caregiver tries something, watches the response, and adjusts. Across thousands of small exchanges, the child begins to learn that distress can bring help, other people can be trusted, and fear does not always have to be faced alone. The response doesn't have to be perfect. No caregiver understands every cry, and no child receives immediate comfort every time. What helps is a stable pattern in which someone pays attention, repairs missed signals, and remains present across weeks, months, and years. The relationship grows because both people slowly learn each other. Developmental research has found that stable, responsive care supports far more than comfort. It helps shape how children handle stress, explore unfamiliar places, regulate emotion, and form later relationships. These abilities don't arrive through food or medicine alone. They develop through contact with other people. A mission plan makes a basic mistake if it treats the nursery as only a life support problem. Life support can hold a safe temperature, provide food, remove waste, and alert a medic when a body is in danger. Responsive care asks for something else. The caregiver must remember the child, pay attention, remain present, and change the response as the child changes. Rotation makes this harder. A schedule might ensure that every shift is covered, while still giving each child a stream of unfamiliar faces. The nursery would be staffed, yet no caregiver might remain long enough to know what a certain silence means, which touch calms this child, or when a small change signals fear instead of fatigue. The demands continue when babies begin to walk. Young children test limits and copy the people around them. They seek reassurance and return to familiar adults after something frightening or confusing, so care must adapt while language and independence are taking shape. So the mission can't count childcare as complete because everybody is healthy. It has to preserve lasting relationships through fatigue, illness, staff turnover, and the pressure of keeping the rest of the ship alive. If those relationships break down, the first sign may not appear on a medical display. It may emerge years later in stress, trust, behavior, or the ability to care for the next group of children. The effects can be measured long after a child leaves the nursery. They can appear in attention, memory, language, and the flexible thinking needed to solve a new problem. Better care doesn't only make childhood feel safer, it can change how well the mind works years later. One of the clearest demonstrations came from the Bucharest Early Intervention Project, which began in Romania in the early 2000s. Researchers followed young children who had been living in institutions with few stable caregivers. In a randomized study, some children remained in institutional care, while others moved into carefully supported family-based care. Researchers then assessed the children repeatedly as they grew. At 4.5 years old, the children placed in family-based care had average intelligence scores about 7 points higher than those who remained in institutional care. The age at placement also made a difference. Children who entered family care before their second birthday tended to do better than children placed later. Improved care could help development recover, but lost time still carried a cost. This was more than a comparison between warm homes and difficult institutions. Random assignment gave the researchers a stronger way to test whether the change in care itself affected development. Even then, children didn't all respond alike. Health, genetics, earlier experience, and the stability of each later placement also shaped what happened. The result was not a promise for every child, but the overall difference was measurable. Later work found that the quality of care continued to predict attention and parts of learning. Some early gaps became smaller, while others remained. A child could be fed, washed, treated by a doctor, and kept safe, yet still miss the steady contact with familiar people that helps a developing brain learn. On a generation ship, we would eventually feel that difference far beyond the childcare rooms. A small decline in attention or flexible thinking could appear years later in classrooms and workshops, or among medical and control room teams. The adults maintaining the ship would be using minds partly shaped by care chosen decades earlier, perhaps by people they never met. None of this means an imperfect childhood always causes lasting harm, or that the ship would need flawless parents. Children can recover, and development remains adaptable. What it means is that stable, responsive caregiving belongs among the systems that protect the mission's future ability to think. The strongest measurable result isn't only a calmer child today, it is an adult who may learn more readily, adapt more effectively, and handle unfamiliar problems many years from now. A ship could improve its childcare in many ways. It could train caregivers, keep groups smaller, limit staff turnover, watch for neglect, and give children more time with familiar adults. Those changes would reduce preventable harm. They would also make daily life less chaotic for everyone living nearby. Yet a well-run nursery is still a nursery. A schedule can make sure a child is fed, washed, examined, and put to bed at a sensible hour. It cannot guarantee that one particular adult knows why she has gone silent at dinner, which story settles her after a bad dream, or when her anger is covering fear. Institutions tend to count what can be recorded: meals served, hours of sleep, medical checks, and reported conflicts. Those records can expose serious failures, and the ship would need them. A child's social world also grows through exchanges that do not fit easily into a log. It matters that someone remembers the child, that adults repair an argument, and that someone still wants the child nearby after bad behavior. Even strong caregivers can't provide all of that alone. On Earth, children grow among siblings, cousins, neighbors, classmates, family friends, and adults who relate to them in different ways. Some bonds are warm, some difficult, and many change over time. Through that crowded social life, a child learns how friendship differs from care, how status works when trust can be repaired, and how to belong without being the center of the room. A generation ship couldn't copy any Earth community exactly, and it shouldn't try to freeze one culture for centuries. Its population would be smaller, its spaces tighter, and much of life would be shaped by safety rules. The aim would be to give children enough lasting relationships, enough variation, and enough freedom to form bonds that weren't assigned by a staffing chart. That introduces a difficult uncertainty. We can measure parts of development, compare care settings, and improve systems that clearly cause harm. We can't specify a perfect childhood, then reproduce it like an air filter. Children help create their own social world, and that world changes with every new friendship, rivalry, separation, and repair. So the mission's concern is no longer only whether each child has a dependable caregiver. It is whether an enclosed population can become a living community for children, rather than a clean institution that raises them efficiently. How do you build a peer world inside a ship, and leave enough room for it to become real? A nursery can be warm, safe, and carefully run, yet still feel like a place where childhood is being managed. Meals arrive on time, the rooms are clean, caregivers notice distress and respond, On paper, the children are doing well because they're alive, growing, and meeting basic milestones. That record would miss a great deal. Children don't develop through care alone. They learn through relationships that no schedule can fully arrange. A friend refuses to share. Two children invent a game that makes no sense to anyone else. Someone is left out, then invited back. An older child becomes protective of a younger one without being assigned the role. We may find these small events frustrating, especially in a closed habitat where conflict feels like a problem to remove. Yet they're also part of how children learn trust, choice, loyalty, repair, and the limits of other people. A well-run institution may soften harm without creating those relationships. Staff can be kind and stable, but they still work shifts. Rules are usually designed by adults. Groups may be arranged by age, sleeping space, or educational need. When every relationship passes through a system, children have fewer chances to decide whom they seek out, whom they avoid, and how they return after something goes wrong. That difference can leave marks even when neglect is absent. A child may grow physically, speak clearly, follow routines, and still have trouble reading other people or building close bonds that survive disagreement. Another may become unusually compliant because compliance makes institutional life easier. From the outside, you might call that success. Inside the child, safety may have become tied to pleasing whoever controls the room. None of this means a ship should abandon structure. In a sealed world, food, sleep, medical care, education, and supervision can't depend on chance. The trouble begins when order becomes the main proof that the nursery is working. Quiet rooms and cooperative children are easy to count. A child's sense of belonging is much harder to measure, and the effects may not appear until years later, when that child is expected to become a partner, a parent, a leader, or simply someone another person can rely on. Survival is only the first test. The ship must raise people who can form relationships its designers did not plan. No engineer can remove all the risk from that. A real community will sometimes be unfair, loud, or hard to control. The institution must protect that unplanned social life even as it tries to keep everyone safe. A patient tutor can teach a child fractions, explain why plants need light, and show how to repair a water pump. A computer might adapt each lesson to the child's pace and notice every mistake. That child could receive excellent individual teaching. None of it would create a group of friends. Children learn from other children in a different way. They copy gestures that no adult planned to teach. They find that a game only continues if everyone accepts its rules, and that those rules sometimes change when someone feels left out. They learn when teasing has gone too far, how long anger lasts, and what kind of apology allows two people to play together again. Much of this knowledge is never stated aloud. Accurate tutoring can explain why sharing is fair. It cannot reproduce the feeling of wanting the same object as another child, grabbing it, seeing the other child's face, and then finding some way to remain together. An adult can guide that moment, but the child still needs another child on the other side of it. The lesson comes through the relationship, including the strain placed upon it. You can see why repeated contact changes the lesson. One meeting rarely does much. Children have to encounter the same peers again after embarrassment, jealousy, affection, boredom, and disagreement. Over time, they learn that another person has a memory, preferences, and limits that continue from yesterday into today. They also learn that their actions shape what happens tomorrow. A child who ruins every game may still be invited back, though perhaps with less trust. Repair becomes real because the relationship has a future. This creates an uncomfortable problem for anyone designing life aboard a ship. Social growth cannot be supplied as a clean stream of information. It needs imitation and friction, moments of loyalty, painful exclusion, forgiveness, and repeated attempts to live together. Adults can prevent cruelty and serious harm, but if they remove every dispute or manage every friendship, they also remove the practice children need. The nursery must allow some disorder without letting disorder become danger. That balance cannot be programmed once and left alone. Adults would have to watch for harm while resisting the urge to settle every disagreement, knowing that intervention can protect a child in one moment and interrupt social learning in another. We do not have a precise formula for where that line should fall, especially inside a small community with few possible friends. Once children need peers who can surprise, resist, forgive, and remember, raising the next generation stops being a set of private caregiving tasks. It becomes a question of whether the ship can support a living community, one that no tutor and no careful schedule can manufacture alone. The first children born aboard the ship would need more than a few companions placed nearby at scheduled times. They would need enough people their own age to form friendships, rivalries, habits, and loyalties that adults didn't arrange for them. A group of children has its own life. Games change while they're being played. Nicknames stick. Someone gets left out. Someone objects, and the group slowly learns what it will accept. That shared life can't be supplied as a service. A tutor might teach cooperation, and a caregiver might model kindness. Yet children still have to discover what those ideas cost when another child refuses to share, breaks a promise, or chooses someone else. They learn who they are, partly through people who have no assigned duty to comfort or instruct them. This makes the first generation a design problem in a very human sense. The mission would have to create a cohort, not simply produce children one at a time. Their ages couldn't be separated so widely that each child grew up with adults above and infants below, but nobody beside them. They would need enough overlap to make childhood feel shared, while each new group remained connected to those a little older and younger. The adults would also be building customs that no launch plan could fully specify. Who joins a meal? How are birthdays marked? What happens after a fight? Which stories become funny because everyone remembers the day they happened? Small customs tell a child that life here was already in motion before they arrived, and that there will still be a place for them tomorrow. Some of those customs would come from Earth. Others would form inside the ship because a sealed vessel has pressures that no community on Earth has faced for an entire lifetime. The children wouldn't simply inherit a culture. They would help make the first version that truly belonged there. And the adults would have to leave room for it to change without letting the community split into groups too small to sustain a shared life. That is the limit of treating childhood as a technical system. You can assign lessons and meals, along with medical checks and supervised play. You cannot assign a best friend or a trusted circle, nor can you schedule the feeling that the people nearby belong to the same world rather than merely maintaining it. So the mission's first generation would begin with a social requirement: enough children born close enough together to become a community among themselves. And once the ship needs a cohort of that size, how many people must be aboard to create it without passing through a dangerous population bottleneck? The first count seems simple enough. If the ship has enough children to form a healthy group, perhaps the population problem is solved. You could look at the nursery in year 1, count every crib, and feel reassured. Yet that visible number can hide a much smaller genetic population underneath it. Population geneticists call this effective population size. It isn't the number of people alive, and it isn't even the number who become parents. It measures how many independent family lines are actually contributing genes to later generations, with enough balance to preserve choices for future pairings. Suppose 40 children are born, but half of them come from just a few closely related parents. The nursery still holds 40 children. Socially, that may be enough peers to begin forming a community. Genetically, though, many of those children carry overlapping copies of the same family history. They don't provide 40 fully separate paths into the future. The balance between families also changes the result. If some adults have many children while others have none, the population may grow while its effective size stays low. The same thing happens if far more people from one sex reproduce than from the other. A head count records bodies. Effective population size records how widely ancestry is being carried forward. That difference becomes more important with each generation. The children aboard the ship won't be choosing partners from an unlimited population. Their options will come from the people born around them, and later from the descendants of that same founding group. Pairings that seem unrelated at first can become close family connections surprisingly quickly when many lines lead back to the same few ancestors. Stored eggs, sperm, or embryos could widen those lines if they remain usable and if the ship can manage them safely across centuries. Even then, a genetic archive isn't a community by itself. Someone must decide when each line enters the living population how to avoid accidental concentration and how much choice future adults retain over who they have children with. So a successful first year can still be misleading. 40 healthy children may look like 40 secure beginnings, while the genetic structure beneath them behaves more like a much smaller group. The ship, therefore, can't choose its founding population by asking only how many children it wants to see together. It has to ask how many independent lines those children carry, how evenly those lines can continue, and whether their grandchildren will still have safe choices that feel like choices. The pressure begins before the ship sees any clear sign of trouble. Children can be born healthy, grow well, and have no close relatives among their own age group, yet still inherit a narrowing set of choices. The problem waits 1 or 2 generations ahead, in relationships that haven't formed yet. Suppose the first adults come from only a few family lines. Their children may have plenty of possible partners who aren't siblings or first cousins. That sounds reassuring. Yet each pairing joins branches that the next generation can't separate again. When the grandchildren reach adulthood, many people aboard may share several ancestors, even if no single connection feels especially close. On Earth, most of us can meet potential partners within a population so large that we never need to calculate how many ancestors we share. A small ship doesn't have that freedom. Everyone lives inside the same closed family tree, and every birth changes the options left for people who may not be born for decades. Close relatives are more likely to carry some of the same rare gene variants. Many of those variants cause no problem when a child receives only one copy. If both parents carry the same harmful version, their child has a greater chance of receiving 2 copies, allowing a hidden condition to appear. One healthy generation doesn't remove that risk. The matching copies may simply not have met yet. The social consequence is uncomfortable, because a ship can't treat people as pieces in a breeding plan without taking something deeply personal from them. Medical teams could offer genetic screening and explain which pairings carry more risk. Still, advice can become pressure when you have only a handful of alternatives. A choice between one approved partner and having no children may be a choice on paper, but it won't feel like one in your life. Stored embryos, sperm, or eggs could bring unused family lines into the population and widen the tree as it starts to close. Those reserves would need careful timing. Use too many from one source, and the ship creates a new cluster of half-siblings and cousins. Wait too long, and the living lines may have mixed so widely that avoiding shared ancestry becomes harder. The first healthy births, then, wouldn't prove the founding group was large enough. They would show only that the earliest pregnancies went well. The harder test comes when those children become adults and find that the ship's small beginning has followed them into the most private decisions of their lives. A tiny founding group sounds elegant because every stored embryo appears to be another possible person waiting safely in reserve. Yet the reserve can't be treated like a jar of interchangeable beginnings. Each embryo, egg, or sperm sample carries a particular family line, and the value of that line depends on who is already alive when it is used. That turns reproduction into a problem of managing losses across generations. Some family lines will disappear because a person has no children. Others may spread too widely because their descendants are healthy and available at the right time. A disease outbreak, an accident, or several failed pregnancies could remove genetic options that the planners expected to keep. The ship might still have plenty of people while drawing its future from a shrinking part of the original gene pool. Population geneticists call this a bottleneck. The visible population can recover after one, perhaps even growing beyond its earlier size, while much of its genetic variety remains gone. You can refill the cabins. You can't recreate a lost family line unless a stored sample still carries it. So the smallest possible child cohort is unlikely to be the safest one. It leaves too much resting on each birth and each surviving line. A larger living population would spread that risk, while a broad frozen collection could restore lines that vanish or become scarce. Even then, the collection would need records detailed enough to show how samples are related, screening that doesn't confuse a known gene with a guaranteed outcome, and rules for choosing among people who have not yet been conceived. That last part is awkward because selection never stays purely medical. If 2 samples appear equally healthy, does the ship favor the rarer ancestry? Does it preserve traits that may help in a different environment, even when nobody can know which traits those will be? And how much power should any small group have over the genetic shape of people born centuries later? The mission has now moved far beyond keeping a few children alive until they can become parents. It needs enough living people to absorb bad luck, enough stored variety to repair what chance removes, and enough restraint to avoid turning genetic management into a plan for designing descendants. Once that is clear, the seed ship is no longer small in the way it first appeared. So how large would its stored bank actually have to be? For years, conservation genetics used a memorable rule. An effective population of 50 might limit inbreeding for a short time. 500 might preserve the ability to adapt across many generations. Those numbers were never a promise of safety. They were rough guides for populations under pressure, and they referred to effective population size, not the number of bodies you could count. In 2014, geneticist Richard Francombe and his colleagues argued that both targets were too low. Newer evidence supported raising the short-term figure from 50 to 100, and the long-term figure from 500 to 1,000. This change didn't come from imagining a worse disaster. It came from accounting more fully for harmful gene variants, traits shaped by many genes, and the diversity a population may need when its surroundings change. That revision pushes any seed ship plan upward. If the long-term target is an effective population of 1,000, storing material from 1,000 donors won't automatically reach it. Some donors may contribute many descendants while others contribute none. Samples may fail, family lines may become uneven, and a loss in one generation can affect every generation that follows. The bank needs a buffer because its contents will not become future ancestry in equal shares. A few cabinets of embryos from a small group would miss the genetic problem before we even ask whether the samples survive. Such a bank might produce births while still lacking enough unrelated contributors for a healthy population. A stronger bank needs broad sampling, clear records of family links, and enough surplus to absorb failed samples or lost family lines. Even 1,000 isn't a universal cutoff. Francombe developed that guidance to conserve threatened populations. It was not written for humans founding a settlement around another star. Settlers could face different diseases, diets, radiation, or gravity. We can't calculate every future demand from Earth, so preserving more variation is safer than aiming at the lowest defensible figure. A stored collection cannot add missing ancestry later. Choices made before launch would therefore shape the population centuries afterward. The revised guidance changes the image in your head. The mission would need a large sample of humanity rather than a tiny vault of precious embryos. It needs material from many unrelated people, with room for losses along the way. Once the target rises from producing births to preserving adaptability, the bank expands from compact cargo into one of the ship's major systems. A larger embryo bank would not just take up more freezer space. It would also create a record-keeping problem that lasts for centuries. Each sample must remain linked to its donor and close relatives, its collection history, and the evidence that it is still safe to use. If you think of the vault as a library, the containers are only half of what must survive. That connection has to survive every handoff. Samples may move between storage units as machines wear out. Records may be copied into new systems long after the first computers have failed. Labels must still match the right containers, and family links must remain intact. Damage must also be found before someone depends on material that can no longer produce a healthy pregnancy. A single lost file could make a perfectly preserved sample almost useless. Without those records, planners might select 2 embryos that seem unrelated even though they share recent ancestry. Or they might overlook a rare line because its records were separated from the material itself. The cold storage could work exactly as designed, while the archive around it slowly failed. That makes backup more complicated than keeping a second list. The ship would need separate copies of both the biological material and its records. They must be far enough apart that one fire, leak, radiation event, or software fault cannot erase the same line everywhere. Each copy would need regular checks because a frozen container can sit still while confidence in that container cannot. The archive would keep changing as well. Once births begin, the crew must record which stored lines enter the living population and which combinations produce children. They must also watch where close relationships are forming. The vault and the population would become one linked system. A choice made in one generation would narrow or widen the options available to people born much later. And someone would have to decide how those options are used. If one line is rare, should it be protected for a future emergency, or introduced early so it does not depend on a single freezer? If several samples carry the same harmful variant, should they be avoided, paired with different lines, or kept because they also preserve ancestry found nowhere else? There may be no calculation that settles every case. So the larger bank brings more than biological insurance. It brings constant accounting, maintenance, judgment, and the risk that a small clerical mistake can echo through families not yet born. The embryos may remain frozen and silent, but the archive around them has to stay alive for the entire voyage. One response to that risk is to carry more genetic material. A larger bank gives the colony more ways to avoid close relationships and replace damaged samples. It can also preserve family lines that might otherwise disappear. Yet the safer estimate does not make the seed ship smaller. It makes nearly every part of the mission larger. More samples require more storage space, cooling equipment, and backup systems. They also produce more records that must remain accurate across centuries. The bank cannot be treated as a frozen box that arrives unchanged. Samples can fail, labels can be corrupted, and cooling systems can drift. Each added layer of protection brings another machine that future crews must test, repair, and understand. Then the burden moves into the nursery. A greater genetic diversity only helps if children from those stored lines are born, raised, and welcomed into the community. A machine may begin a pregnancy, but it cannot feed a newborn at 3 a.m, notice a fever, teach language, or help a frightened child form lasting bonds. Every added birth places more work on caregivers who are already keeping the ship alive. You can see the awkward limit. The colony may need many births to build a healthy population while having too few adults to provide steady care. Increasing the number of embryos does nothing by itself to increase the number of patient hands, available hours, or experienced parents. A plan that looks safer in a genetics model can become much harder to carry out in a nursery. Once the bank contains many possible future people, decisions about timing also change the shape of the colony. Leaders may have to balance genetic variety against housing and food production. Medical capacity and the ages of people aboard would also limit the choice. A birth schedule that protects rare lines could place too much pressure on one generation of caregivers. Delaying those births could leave certain samples dependent on aging equipment for another 50 years. A larger bank may still be the better choice. The problem is that biological safety cannot be purchased by itself. Cryostorage has to survive beside family life and public authority. It must keep working through maintenance problems and disagreements long after the system's designers are gone. As the safety margin rises, the ship must carry more than embryos. It needs spare equipment, trained caregivers, reliable records, room for growing families, and rules able to survive changing needs. The genetic plan has not removed the colony's dependencies, it has enlarged them. So when the first children born from that archive grow up, who decides what kind of colony they are being asked to continue? The first children born aboard the ship begin life inside a plan made before they existed. Their names may be new, but their destination, family structure, education, and expected work could all have been chosen years earlier by people on Earth. While they are young, adults must make decisions for them. Every child begins that way. The difference is that these decisions may reach across an entire lifetime. A mission can assign duties to its crew because the crew agreed to join. These children never agreed. They didn't choose the voyage, accept its risks, or promise to build the settlement waiting in the flight plan. When they become adults, they aren't equipment delivered in working condition. They are people with the same claim to direct their lives as the adults who raised them. That creates a problem no genetic plan can solve. The ship may depend on every trained person doing a certain job. One young adult may be expected to repair the water system because no one else has the right training. Another may face pressure to have children because the population plan calls for births at a certain time. Refusing either role could place everyone at risk, yet forced work and forced parenthood would turn survival into a claim of ownership over a person. The pressure might never sound like a command. It could come through praise, guilt, limited choices, or the reminder that everyone else is depending on you. On a small ship, there may be nowhere to leave and no second community to join. Saying no can be legally permitted while remaining almost impossible in practice. By then, the people born aboard are no longer passengers being carried towards someone else's colony. They are the community. They may accept the destination and continue the mission exactly as planned. They may also change its laws, delay a landing, revise family policies, or decide that an instruction sent from Earth no longer fits the world they actually inhabit. The founders can teach them why the mission began. They can preserve knowledge, prepare them well, and explain what failure would cost. They cannot pass down consent as if it were stored beside the embryos. Each generation has to give its own. So the mission's success changes the source of authority. A project launched from Earth becomes a society governed by adults who never volunteered for it. Keeping that society alive will require cooperation, but cooperation under unavoidable pressure is difficult to separate from control. The next limit is therefore political. What power can a ship use when every available choice affects everyone else's survival? A mission charter can survive for centuries. Its words can be copied, taught, argued over, and carried into every meeting where the ship decides what to do. It can tell later generations why their ancestors left Earth, which destination they chose, and what dangers the voyage was meant to prevent. What it cannot do is make those later generations morally bound to the founder's plan. The difference is easy to miss because everyone aboard still depends on choices made before they were born. They live inside a machine designed for one purpose. The farms, engines, training, and population may all have been arranged around reaching a particular star. Changing course could waste centuries of work or place every life aboard at risk. That gives the charter enormous practical force. It does not give the dead permanent command. A contract usually gets its authority from people who accept it, or from a system of law they recognize. The ship's descendants did neither. If you were born aboard, you would inherit the destination along with the air supply. Even if the original plan were wise, you did not sign it, and no founding document can reach through time to collect your agreement in advance. The charter can still serve as evidence. It can explain what earlier generations were trying to protect and record promises that should not be discarded lightly. A crew deciding whether to change course would have to face the costs, including those carried by children not yet born. Yet the document remains one reason to consider. It cannot settle the decision by itself. This becomes uncomfortable when survival and purpose pull in different directions. Suppose the target system appears dangerous, while another reachable star offers better prospects. Ship leaders might insist that abandoning the plan would betray everyone who built the vessel. Their opponents could answer that loyalty to the founders cannot require living adults to accept a risk they judge intolerable. Both sides would be speaking from inside the same closed world. Nobody could simply leave, form a separate country, or wait for help from Earth. Any ruling would shape the food, work, movement, and future of people who could not escape its effects. So a charter may preserve a mission's memory across 1,000 years, while its authority weakens each time another adult inherits the ship without choosing the task. If the founders no longer rule, someone aboard must decide who does, and what happens when control of survival gives that power teeth. A siege ship can carry frozen cells across the dark and still fail before a single child is born. The machinery may work exactly as planned, and the destination may be safe. Yet the adults who inherit the final decision could look at the planet below and say, "Not yet." That choice would change the engineering of the mission. A settlement plan built around immediate births assumes people will accept the founder's calendar. If they delay for 10 years, the ship must keep feeding its crew, maintaining the stored cells, replacing worn parts, and holding its orbit or flight path. If they delay for 50 years, those demands pass to another generation, along with the decision itself. Refusal is harder still. The first adults with full control might decide that creating children for a dangerous settlement would be wrong. They could remain aboard, move toward a different world, or spend their lives gathering better evidence. Their reasons need not come from panic or sabotage. A planet that looked promising from Earth may have harsh seasons, unstable ground, toxic dust, or chemistry that remote instruments missed. If you were responsible for the children who would live there, waiting might seem like the safest choice. Even agreement may not preserve the original plan. The crew could accept settlement while changing who is born, when births begin, how many people live on the surface, or whether the ship remains occupied as a refuge. Each change reaches back into physical design. Habitats need spare capacity, and food systems must support a long delay. Stored biological material has to remain usable without a fixed release date. The vessel may need enough fuel and shielding to serve as a home far longer than its builders expected. So flexibility can't be left in a legal document alone. We would have to build it into the ship. It has mass, draws power, takes storage space, and adds repair work to every extra year the systems must survive. A ship designed around obedience can be lighter because it assumes the schedule will hold. A ship designed for free adults must carry the physical cost of their ability to refuse. And that leaves an awkward consequence. The better the ship protects that freedom, the less certain its founders can be that their mission will happen at all. It may reach the right world with everything intact, only to become a permanent home for people who choose a different future. If the ship must survive that choice, what would success mean? Success would mean carrying life through an unbroken chain, instead of only delivering frozen embryos to another star. A seed ship could cross the distance, enter orbit around a living world, and still fail before a single child could grow up there. Arrival is only one handoff. The first transfer begins in storage, where embryos must remain viable through the long flight. They then move into gestation, which depends on artificial wombs working far beyond anything medicine can do today. Birth passes the mission to newborn care, where machines or caregivers must keep a completely dependent child alive. After that, survival depends on attachment, language, play, conflict, and the presence of other children. No stage can be skipped because the later ones are built from the earlier ones. Genetic health has to pass through the same chain. A large collection of embryos may contain enough diversity on paper, but genes don't raise children or decide who will have children together. Those choices belong to people who must understand their community, trust one another, and have enough freedom to refuse. Biology may begin the settlement, yet only a functioning society can continue it. That society then inherits the political handoff. The first generation must learn why the ship came, how its systems work, and what risks wait outside. It must also gain the authority to change the plan. If every child is raised only to obey instructions left by people who died centuries earlier, the mission has preserved a command, not a human future. If they're free to choose, they may reject the settlement, alter its rules, or decide that the ship itself is home. This is why no single breakthrough completes the seed ship. Perfect storage cannot rescue failed gestation, and a safe birth cannot rescue absent care. Skilled caregivers cannot replace peers forever. Genetic variety cannot preserve a community that loses trust or political consent. Each success hands a living, unfinished task to the next stage, and every handoff must work in sequence. We can't judge the mission by its strongest link, because the weakest handoff still decides whether anyone inherits the next one. The ship therefore fails closed. One broken link doesn't leave a smaller version of the mission running. It stops the transfer of human life as a continuing culture. The final result must be adults who can care for one another, maintain the technology, raise another generation, and decide what kind of society they want. They are not cargo reaching its destination. They are the people who must make arrival mean something. And if success belongs to them rather than to the founders, who gets to decide whether the mission was worth beginning? A generation ship can't be improved one part at a time, as if its problems were sitting in separate rooms. Every system receives something from the system before it, changes it, and hands it onward. If the first handoff is weak, a stronger machine later in the chain doesn't erase that weakness. It has to work with what arrived. Suppose a better reactor gives the ship more power. That sounds like a clear gain, and it is. Yet more power may allow larger farms, which need more water, more pumps, more nutrients, and more people to maintain them. Those people need living space and medical care. A larger population also changes how much food must be stored, how disputes are settled, and how many skills must survive from one generation to the next. The reactor solved one limit while tightening several others. The same thing happens in reverse. A highly reliable farm can't make up for a population that has lost the knowledge needed to repair it. A sound education system can't preserve skills if childhood health begins to fail. Better medicine can keep more people alive, but that changes food demand, housing, family planning, and the amount of work the ship must support. Each success arrives carrying fresh requirements. This is why the mission isn't a menu of inventions from which engineers can choose the best items. The parts are coupled. Life support shapes population policy, which shapes education and maintenance. In time, maintenance decides whether life support remains available at all. The chain eventually bends back toward its own beginning. You can see the awkward human consequence. A technical upgrade made on Earth might look almost perfect by itself. Aboard the ship it could become dangerous if it needs parts that cannot be made there, specialists who no longer exist, or growth the farms cannot feed. The device hasn't failed. The surrounding mission can't provide the conditions built into its design. That makes comparison difficult as well. One design may have safer reactors but weaker education. Another may carry better medical tools but depend on fragile software. There is no single score that lets strength in one place cancel weakness somewhere else, because the weak point changes what every later strength can actually do. The mission must therefore be judged as one connected inheritance. Every link receives unfinished problems, adds demands of its own, and passes both forward. Readiness belongs to the whole chain, never to its best machine. If no subsystem can be called successful by itself, how could anyone decide whether the whole mission is ready to leave Earth? A seed ship is ready only when its many handoffs are dependable together. The launch vehicle has to deliver the payload without damaging it. Power must remain available during the long crossing. Guidance has to bring the craft to the right world, and the landing system must place its cargo somewhere it can survive. Then the machinery on the ground has to wake, assess its surroundings, and begin work without anyone nearby to repair it. Each handoff can look highly reliable on its own, and still leave the full mission exposed. Suppose 10 major steps each have a 99% chance of working. That sounds reassuring, yet the chance that all 10 succeed is only about 90%. Add more steps, more years, and more dependence between systems, and the remaining margin keeps shrinking. This is why the seed ship cannot be defended by pointing to its strongest component. A reactor that runs for centuries cannot compensate for a lander that strikes the ground too hard. A perfect landing cannot rescue stored cells damaged by radiation, and healthy cells are no help if the machines meant to raise and teach their descendants lose the information they need. None of this means every part must be perfect. No spacecraft has ever met that standard. It means failures need somewhere to go. A damaged sensor may have a backup, and a stalled process may be tried again. A machine might diagnose itself, use another tool, or continue in a reduced state. Reliability comes partly from preventing failure, but also from making sure one failure does not end the entire attempt. The uncomfortable part is that a seed ship would need this tolerance across systems that have never operated together for anything close to the required time. Tests on Earth can expose many faults, and robotic missions can prove pieces of the design. Yet neither can reproduce centuries of travel followed by construction on an unknown world. Some confidence would always come from models, accelerated aging, and shorter demonstrations. The mission would leave before experience had answered everything. So a serious plan begins with the weakest unresolved handoff, not the most impressive machine. It names what has been demonstrated, what has only been modeled, what can recover after failure, and what still carries the whole mission on a single attempt. That standard does not give us a simple verdict. It gives us a way to build the blueprint without hiding the missing pieces. Which weak link should that blueprint face first? The first weak link to face is the moment a newborn becomes completely dependent on a caregiver who has never been alive. Before the child can join a peer group, learn the mission, or take part in government, someone has to notice hunger, pain, illness, fear, and the small changes that mean something is going wrong. If that handoff fails, the later systems never get a chance to help. That puts early caregiving ahead of the more dramatic machinery. An artificial womb could complete gestation exactly as planned and still deliver a healthy baby into a system that cannot raise one. Feeding and cleaning are only the visible parts of the job. A caregiver must respond at the right time, adjust when the expected response doesn't work, and tell the difference between distress that will pass and distress that needs treatment. Human adults do this imperfectly, with judgment shaped by experience, touch, memory, and help from other adults. A machine would need some way to replace enough of that function. It would not have to copy a parent in every detail, and no responsible proposal could claim that every feature of human care is equally important. Yet it would need evidence that a child can form stable bonds, develop language, regulate stress, and remain physically safe under the care available on the ship. We do not have a full demonstration of that claim. This is why advertising the embryos first gets the plan backward. Frozen embryos are cargo until a long chain of living care begins. The blueprint should begin at the first point, where stored biological potential becomes a child who can suffer from delay, error, or neglect. Then it should ask which parts require a responsive social mind, which can be automated, and where a human judgment must somehow enter the system. Other weak links remain. A small founding population could face genetic trouble, and children raised together would still need teachers, medical decisions, conflict rules, and some path into adult authority. Those problems deserve their own tests. They simply occur later in the chain. Ranked this way, the proposal becomes less impressive on a poster and much more informative. Its first design problem is not how to carry embryos across the stars. It is how to meet the first child with care reliable enough that there can someday be adults to inherit the mission. A frozen embryo is not pure science fiction. Human embryos are already stored at very low temperatures, thawed, transferred, and sometimes born as healthy children years after they were created. Animal work extends that evidence across more species and different storage methods. That gives an interstellar embryo mission one real foothold. Living cells can survive a long pause when the conditions are tightly controlled. The claim stays narrow, though. A clinic on Earth has trained staff, spare equipment, tested supplies, and a patient who can be treated if something goes wrong. A spacecraft arriving after centuries would have none of that help. Its stored embryos would need to survive launch, radiation, mechanical failure, slow damage inside the storage system, and every repair made by machines whose builders were long dead. Even success there would settle only the first handoff. Thawing an embryo is not the same as carrying a pregnancy. Carrying a pregnancy is not the same as delivering safely. Delivery is not the same as keeping a newborn alive, and survival alone does not produce a healthy child who can speak, trust, learn, and eventually raise another generation. This is where proposals often borrow confidence from one proven step and spread it across the entire chain. Embryo freezing has evidence, so artificial gestation is treated as if it were almost ready. Automation works in a controlled laboratory, so autonomous childcare is treated as an engineering extension. Software can follow medical rules, so it is asked to replace judgment when a body or a child does something no rule anticipated. Those substitutions are not evidence, they are places where evidence is missing. That doesn't make the mission worthless to study. It tells us how to describe it without pretending. The storage piece has a bounded basis in present medicine. Parts of monitoring, robotics, and closed life support have useful demonstrations. Yet no system has joined those pieces into a full human reproductive chain, operated it without nearby adults, and continued through childhood into a stable population. So the strongest claim is smaller than the grand proposal, and stronger because of it. We may know how to preserve the biological beginning of a person for a very long time. We do not yet know how to build the world that person would need after waking. Until that world exists in tested form, the embryo is not a mission plan. It is one supported component waiting inside a machine, a nursery, and a society that remain unbuilt. A seed ship succeeds only when the people it raises no longer need to be treated as cargo. At some point, they must inherit more than working machines and stored embryos. They must inherit the authority to decide what their community is for. That changes the standard. The ship could reach its destination, open every chamber safely, raise healthy children, and still fail in the way that counts most. If those children grow up under commands they can never revise, the mission has delivered human beings without giving them a human future. It has preserved a population while denying that population the right to choose its own direction. You can see what this would demand from the first generation. They would need ways to make decisions, settle disputes, share limited resources, and change rules that no longer fit. They would also need room for disagreement. Some might want to continue the founding plan as closely as possible. Others might want fewer births, slower expansion, a different settlement, or no further use of the stored embryos at all. Those choices could be hard for the mission's designers to accept, especially after so much work and sacrifice. They would still belong to the living community. This is where technical success gives up control. The builders can leave good records, reliable tools, and fair starting rules. They can explain why the ship was launched and what they hoped its passengers might create. They cannot turn that hope into a permanent command. People born centuries later would have their own dangers, loyalties, beliefs, and reasons for continuing or stopping. Their consent cannot be supplied in advance by someone on Earth. Continuity, then, means more than keeping human genes alive. It means preserving the conditions in which human beings can choose one another, accept responsibility, revise inherited plans, and decide whether another generation should follow. That choice has to remain real, even when the answer disappoints the dead. A seed ship may begin as engineering, but it ends as society design. Its highest achievement would not be the first birth, or even the first healthy child reaching adulthood. It would be the day that child and others beside them can govern their shared life without asking a vanished Earth for permission. Only then has the ship carried human continuity rather than a set of biological instructions. It has made a community capable of choosing its own tomorrow, including the freedom to choose a tomorrow its founders never planned. An embryo can survive storage, and that is the strongest piece of the whole idea. Clinical cryostorage gives us real evidence that early human life can be paused and later resumed. Yet that evidence reaches only across bounded clinical timescales. It does not show that embryos can cross centuries, wake safely, and become a settlement. Storage is a foothold, not the completed climb. Once an embryo leaves storage, the mission enters a chain that machines cannot skip. A pregnancy must begin and continue. A birth must be survived. A newborn must be fed, held, soothed, and protected. Artificial gestation has not reached a full human pregnancy, so no current system closes that gap. The cold chamber ends where caregiving begins, with a helpless child depending on whatever waits outside. That child also needs more than feeding and clean air. Human development happens through attachment, a steady relationship with caregivers who respond, comfort, teach, and remain present. A machine might perform some physical tasks, but storage evidence tells us nothing about whether an artificial nursery could provide the social bond a child needs. Keeping a body alive is only one part of raising someone. Then the problem widens. One healthy child cannot become a society, and a room filled with children of different ages does not automatically become one either. They need peers, trust, ways to settle conflict, and enough capable caregivers to guide them before the oldest children are ready. The first generation would be growing up while also becoming the people responsible for everyone who follows. This is why raw embryo count can mislead. A large store may contain enormous biological promise without providing a genetically viable population. The embryos have to represent enough variation, survive every earlier handoff, and eventually become people who can choose whether to have children. Genetics may shape the limits of the population, but it cannot command human lives to follow a breeding schedule designed before launch. A charter cannot settle that problem in advance. The people born at the destination did not approve the mission, choose its laws, or agree to continue it. They may inherit instructions, records, machines, and a prepared account of why the ship was sent. They also inherit the right to judge that account for themselves. Sovereignty does not disappear merely because the founders are far away or long dead. So the first generation is not cargo waiting to be delivered. It is the first community formed among people who must learn to care for one another before any outside help can arrive. Mission success therefore begins after transport. Stored embryos must become pregnancies, births, attached children, a peer society, a genetically viable population, and finally a community able to continue by free choice. That sequence gives you a simple way to test any claim about embryo colonization. Ask whether the proposal solves only storage and transport, or whether it carries the burden through pregnancy, birth, caregiving, peer life, population health, and consent. A break anywhere in that chain does not erase the achievement of reaching another world. It means colonization remains unsolved, moved farther from Earth. None of this proves that a seed ship can never work. Current evidence does not reach far enough to settle that verdict. Cryostorage has real clinical support, while full artificial pregnancy, lifelong machine caregiving, stable society formation, and freely chosen continuity remain beyond what storage can establish. The fairest answer is narrower. We have evidence for the first foothold, and speculation across much of the ground after it. A ship may arrive with every embryo intact, and still be carrying only the beginning of its task. Its success will be measured in children who feel safe, people who can live together, and adults free to decide what they owe the plan that created them. What reaches the destination is not a shipment of future people. It is a first generation that must inherit the project, judge it, and choose whether it continues.